Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Educational settings in discourse analysis. Interactive assistant educational settings refer to the various environments where learning occurs, such as classrooms, schools, universities, training centers, and online platforms. In discourse analysis, these settings are examined to understand how language shapes teaching, learning, and social interaction within educational contexts. Discourse analysis in educational settings explores how knowledge is constructed, how identities, such as teacher and student, are negotiated, and how power dynamics influence communication and learning outcomes. By analyzing the ways language is used in educational environments, researchers can uncover the underlying norms, values, and structures that guide educational practices. This includes examining teacher-student interactions, curriculum discourse, policy documents, peer discussions, and even the role of digital communication in education. Discourse analysis offers insights into how educational settings foster or hinder learning, inclusivity, and the development of critical thinking skills. Key features of educational settings in discourse analysis. 1. Teacher-student interactions. Teacher-student interactions are central to the learning process and play a crucial role in shaping the educational experience. Discourse analysis of these interactions focuses on how teachers use language to instruct, guide, and manage classroom dynamics, and how students respond and engage with the material. Example: in a classroom discussion, a teacher might ask, "Can anyone explain why this formula works?" And a student might respond with their understanding. Discourse analysis would explore how the teacher's questioning technique encourages or limits student participation and how the student's response reflects their grasp of the content. The analysis would also look at how the teacher's feedback, whether encouraging or corrective, impacts student confidence and engagement. 2. Power dynamics in the classroom. Power dynamics are a critical aspect of educational settings, with teachers often holding authority over students in terms of managing discourse, assessing performance, and controlling classroom behavior. Discourse analysis examines how these power relations are enacted through language and how they influence students' participation, learning outcomes, and agency. Example: a teacher might use directive language like, "You must complete this assignment by tomorrow," or more collaborative language like, "Let's work together to set a deadline that makes sense for everyone." Discourse analysis would explore how these different approaches reflect hierarchical or shared power dynamics and how they affect student motivation and autonomy. 3. Curriculum and educational content. Educational content and curriculum documents play a significant role in shaping what is taught and how it is framed. Discourse analysis of curricula and educational materials examines how knowledge is constructed and whose perspectives are included or excluded. It also looks at how certain subjects are framed to reflect particular ideologies or social norms. Example: in a history textbook, a chapter on colonization might frame the topic in terms of exploration and expansion, while downplaying or omitting the experiences of indigenous populations. Discourse analysis would investigate how language constructs a particular narrative and whose knowledge is privileged, potentially marginalizing alternative perspectives. 4. Questioning techniques and critical thinking. The way teachers ask questions can either promote or hinder critical thinking in students. Discourse analysis of questioning techniques in educational settings focuses on how open-ended questions encourage deeper engagement with the material, while closed-ended questions may limit students' opportunities to think critically or creatively. Example: a teacher might ask, "What do you think would happen if we changed this variable in the experiment?" encouraging students to hypothesize and explore possibilities. Discourse analysis would examine how this type of questioning fosters critical thinking by prompting students to engage with the scientific method. In contrast, a question like, "Is this the correct answer?" would limit the scope of the discussion. 5. Student identity and participation. In educational settings, students' identities are shaped by how they are positioned in classroom discourse, whether as passive recipients of knowledge or as active participants in learning. Discourse analysis looks at how language constructs student roles and identities and how these roles influence participation, engagement, and self-perception. Example: A teacher might praise a student's contribution by saying, "That's a really insightful point. Well done," reinforcing the student's identity as a competent learner. Discourse analysis would explore how such feedback positions the student positively in the classroom community, encouraging further participation. On the other hand, if a student is frequently interrupted or ignored, they may develop a disengaged or marginalized identity within the classroom. 6. Inclusion and exclusion in educational discourse. Educational settings are sites where issues of inclusion and exclusion are often negotiated through discourse. Discourse analysis examines how language includes or excludes certain groups of students, such as those from marginalized communities, non-native speakers, or students with disabilities, and how these dynamics affect learning outcomes. Example: in a classroom where the majority of students speak English fluently, a teacher might unintentionally exclude non-native speakers by using idiomatic expressions that are difficult to understand. Discourse analysis would investigate how language choices either support or hinder the inclusion of diverse learners, affecting their participation and learning experience. 7. Digital communication and online learning. With the rise of digital learning platforms and virtual classrooms, discourse analysis of educational settings now includes the study of digital communication. This involves analyzing how language is used in online discussions, forums, emails, and virtual lessons to facilitate or hinder learning. The shift to digital learning environments also brings new challenges and opportunities for engagement, participation, and equity. Example: in an online course discussion forum, a student might post a question, and their peers might respond with different interpretations or insights. Discourse analysis would focus on how the online format affects turn-taking, the depth of engagement, and the inclusivity of the conversation, particularly for students who may be less confident participating in face-to-face settings. Methods for analyzing educational settings in discourse. 1. Critical discourse analysis, CDA. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, is widely used in educational settings to examine how language reflects and reinforces power structures, ideologies, and inequalities in the classroom. CDA is used to explore how certain discourses dominate the educational landscape and how they shape teaching practices, curriculum content, and student identities. Example: a CDA of a school's discipline policy might reveal how certain groups of students, such as those from low-income backgrounds, are disproportionately targeted by rules framed as maintaining order or ensuring safety. The analysis would focus on how language constructs notions of discipline and authority, and how these constructions reinforce social inequalities. 2. Conversation analysis. Conversation analysis examines the structure of interactions in educational settings, focusing on turn-taking, interruptions, pauses, and the flow of dialogue between teachers and students. This method helps analyze how classroom discussions are managed and how participation is distributed among students. Example: conversation analysis of a classroom discussion might reveal that certain students dominate the conversation while others are frequently interrupted or ignored. The analysis would explore how these interaction patterns shape the classroom dynamics and how they either promote or hinder inclusive participation. 3. Ethnographic discourse analysis. Ethnographic discourse analysis combines discourse analysis with ethnographic observation, studying how language is used in specific cultural and social contexts within educational settings. This method is particularly useful for understanding how local norms, values, and institutional practices shape communication and learning. Example: ethnographic discourse analysis of a bilingual classroom might examine how teachers and students navigate language use, switching between languages to accommodate different learners. The analysis would explore how these language practices reflect cultural norms and how they influence student engagement and learning outcomes. 4. Narrative analysis. Narrative analysis focuses on how individuals in educational settings construct and share their personal stories and experiences. This method is used to analyze how students and teachers create narratives about learning, identity, and achievement, and how these narratives influence classroom dynamics. Example: a student's story about their experience with a challenging project might be analyzed to understand how they position themselves as a learner, whether they see the experience as a struggle, a success, or a learning opportunity. Discourse analysis would explore how these narratives reflect broader discourses about perseverance, intelligence, and self-worth in the educational context. Examples of educational settings in discourse analysis. Example 1. Power dynamics in teacher-student interactions. In a high school classroom, The teacher might use directive language to control the flow of the lesson, such as, "Everyone, please focus on this problem, and don't move on until I say so." Discourse analysis would explore how this language reinforces the teacher's authority and limits student agency, positioning the teacher as the primary knowledge holder and students as passive recipients. Example 2. Peer interaction in group work. In a group project, students might use collaborative language like, "Let's try doing it this way, and if that doesn't work, we can think of another solution." Discourse analysis would examine how this language fosters a collaborative and problem-solving approach, positioning all group members as equal contributors. The analysis would also explore how peer interaction promotes the co-construction of knowledge and student engagement. Example 3. Framing of knowledge in curriculum content. A history curriculum might frame World War II as a story of heroism and sacrifice, focusing on the roles of the Allied powers and glossing over the experiences of colonized nations. Discourse analysis would investigate how this framing constructs knowledge in a way that privileges certain historical narratives while marginalizing others. The analysis would also examine how this framing influences students' understanding of global history and power relations. Example 4. Inclusion in multicultural classrooms. In a multicultural classroom, a teacher might use inclusive language such as, "Let's make sure everyone has a chance to share their perspective," to encourage diverse voices in classroom discussions. Discourse analysis would explore how the teacher's language promotes inclusivity and values the diverse experiences and viewpoints of all students, fostering a more equitable learning environment. Example 5. Student identity in virtual learning environments. In an online class discussion, a student might post a thoughtful analysis of a reading, and the teacher might respond with, "You've made an excellent point that really pushes the conversation forward." Discourse analysis would examine how this feedback constructs the student's identity as an engaged, capable learner in the virtual classroom and how this positive reinforcement encourages further participation. Challenges in analyzing educational settings through discourse. 1. Complexity of classroom interactions. Classroom interactions involve multiple participants and layers of communication, making it challenging to capture all the nuances of discourse. Discourse analysts must carefully examine both verbal and nonverbal communication, as well as the social and institutional contexts that shape these interactions. 2. Power imbalances. Power dynamics between teachers and students, as well as among students themselves, can influence how discourse unfolds in educational settings. Discourse analysts must be sensitive to these power imbalances and how they affect participation, engagement, and learning outcomes. 3. Cultural and linguistic diversity. Educational settings are often culturally and linguistically diverse, which adds complexity to discourse analysis. Analysts must consider how cultural norms and language differences affect communication and inclusivity in the classroom. Conclusion. Educational settings are rich sites for discourse analysis, offering insights into how language shapes teaching, learning, and social dynamics. By analyzing teacher-student interactions, curriculum discourse, power dynamics, and inclusion practices, discourse analysis helps educators understand how language influences knowledge construction, student identity, and classroom participation. Whether examining face-to-face classroom discussions, peer interactions in group work, or digital communication in virtual learning environments, discourse analysis reveals the intricate ways in which language both reflects and constructs educational realities. Through this lens, educators and policymakers can develop more inclusive, engaging, and effective educational practices that better serve diverse learners. Frequently asked questions. What does educational settings mean in the context of discourse analysis? Educational settings refer to environments where learning takes place, including classrooms, schools, universities, training centers, and online platforms. Discourse analysis in these settings studies how language shapes educational interactions, knowledge sharing, and power dynamics. Why are teacher-student interactions significant in discourse analysis of educational settings? Teacher-student interactions are central to learning and reveal how instructional language influences engagement, participation, and knowledge construction. Discourse analysis examines how teachers' language, questioning techniques, and feedback impact students' understanding and confidence. How does discourse analysis reveal power dynamics in the classroom? Discourse analysis studies how teachers' language reflects authority over students and shapes classroom interactions. For example, directive language reinforces teacher control, while collaborative language can promote shared power, affecting student agency and motivation. What role does the curriculum play in knowledge construction in educational discourse? The curriculum shapes what is taught and how it is framed, reflecting particular perspectives or ideologies. Discourse analysis of curriculum documents and textbooks reveals whose knowledge is prioritized, often exposing biases and the exclusion of marginalized perspectives. How are questioning techniques analyzed to assess critical thinking? Discourse analysis looks at whether teachers use open-ended or closed-ended questions. Open-ended questions encourage exploration and critical thinking, while closed-ended questions may limit responses and hinder deeper engagement with the material. How does discourse analysis address issues of inclusion and exclusion in educational settings? Discourse analysis examines language to understand how students from diverse backgrounds are included or excluded. For instance, certain language choices may alienate non-native speakers or students with disabilities, impacting their participation and learning experience. What is the impact of digital communication on learning in educational settings? With the rise of online learning, discourse analysis now includes the study of digital communication. It examines how language in virtual classrooms, discussion forums, and emails influences engagement, participation, and inclusivity, often differently than in traditional settings. Which methods are commonly used to study educational settings in discourse analysis? Critical discourse analysis, CDA, focuses on how language reflects power, ideology, and inequality in educational settings. Conversation analysis analyzes turn-taking and interruptions in classroom discussions. Ethnographic discourse analysis observes language use in specific cultural and social contexts within educational environments. Narrative analysis examines how personal stories and experiences shape identities in educational discourse. How does discourse analysis explore student identity in educational settings? Discourse analysis studies how students' roles and identities are constructed through language, such as feedback that encourages a student's confidence or labels that marginalize others. This analysis shows how discourse can reinforce or challenge students' self-concepts. What challenges are associated with analyzing discourse in educational settings? Challenges include the complexity of classroom interactions, power imbalances between teachers and students, and cultural and linguistic diversity. Discourse analysts must carefully consider these factors to interpret the educational discourse accurately and inclusively.